All right, we are live. All right, hello everybody, and welcome to
Hi.
hi. So, welcome to a Techclusive Insider Series event. To introduce myself, my name is Chris Allaire. I am the founder and CEO of the award-winning company Verity, the staffing firm. However, I'm also the founder of the exclusive um, elite technology group called Techclusive, where it's for the elite level in technology to come share ideas. The brightest minds in tech will come to meet. Communicate, collaborate, share open ideas, get open opinions, and allow other people that they're associated with trust to get ideas and innovation from. We are having a live event today with Dr. Eleonore Fornier-Tombs. Eleanor, she is, it's really interesting. So she handles all AI strategy and governance for the United Nations. So what Eleanor does is she's shaping the global conversations around governance, innovation, and ethics. She's been on the table where governments, corporations, civilian society hammer out the future of AI. And today, we get to learn from her perspective. So I am super happy to welcome Eleanor to our streaming event. So Eleanor, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Hi, everyone.
So, all right. So to start, just kind of some back and forth a little bit. So you've worked a lot on developing AI strategy and policy at the UN.
Yeah.
So what are some of the lessons learned in a global context that could apply to companies here in the US also?
Yeah. So, to give a little bit of background, I'm a data scientist by training. And so I worked first in the UN and also at the World Bank and in a fintech company in New York. So I kind of went around as a data scientist, especially in the early days, 10, 12 years ago, in the early days of data science. And I ended up working in predictive analytics in relation to humanitarian crises. So, especially during COVID, trying to figure out, what would happen to a country experiencing a humanitarian crisis if they also have COVID going on and, they also have a drought and they have a conflict and those kinds of things. And it really helped the UN prepare for delivering aid. And I got around maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I started being really interested in the governance and policy side of this because we were increasingly using these AI tools. And originally it was just machine learning, kind of traditional machine learning. And then more and more as tools are launched, we see opportunities to use Gen AI, LLMs, and all kinds of new technologies. And so now I lead a research team at the UN, and it's a part of the UN that's really research focused called UN University, and we have an office in New York, which is really try to help the UN and countries around the world figure out this issue of governing AI. So, what kind of policies should be put in place to make sure that globally we harness the opportunities of AI and we make sure to mitigate its risks and its harm for people. So I think it's the kind of bird's eye view, and for companies, I think that there's a number of areas that have been really interesting. One is that it's a conversation right now. AI, everybody is aware and involved in it. And so, in a way, it's a highly visible issue. And for companies, as much as governments, reputation really matters because everyone, clients, stakeholders, um, staff members, everyone is going to have an opinion on your adoption of AI. And people are much more familiar now. So people use AI on a day-to-day basis, especially the Gen AI tools. So that's something that might be different from another technology governance issue. So for example, cybersecurity is, a little bit less visible, highly visible. The regular person is not going to have an opinion necessarily on your company's policy in cybersecurity. Whereas here, your AI policy could come under scrutiny, even for people that are not involved in policy or technology. The other area that I think is really interesting is this whole multi-stakeholder context. So AI, when we worked on things at a government level or at a UN level, it was always about involving companies, involving NGOs, nonprofits, involving different stakeholder groups to have a kind of bigger picture. And so that means that a lot of companies that were not necessarily involved in the policy space before had a voice and were kind of welcome at the table. And that's not just a tech company. That's also could be, a financial services company or a health that is integrating AI and that now wants to explain from their perspective what would be the best policies in place that would support their work. So I think those are the kinds of things that have made this a really exciting and interesting space, and it allows the UN people to also collaborate with US companies and global companies in a way that we might not have done on other kinds of issues. Oh, I can't hear you actually.
Oh, here we go.
Okay,
Sorry about that. So I was actually interested because there's something else I was listening to, actually similar podcast type of thing yesterday, where they were talking about regulations in AI. And then obviously there's a lot more regulations out in the EU around AI than we have in the US. And I was reading something else about, so there's something it looks like it's gonna be effective in February. It's called the Colorado AI Act. So around, reasonable care and governance duties. Is this, obviously we're in a different place. Do you see the US instilling regulations around AI the same way that the EU does?
Yeah, so the US perspective on AI regulation is similar also to its, perspective also on data and digital regulation. In the sense that the EU it's not that it has more legislation, it's that it has one kind of umbrella legislation that covers all uses of AI. And that's the EU AI Act. And it was enacted really recently. And basically, it divides uses of AI into risk levels, and says if you're using any kind of AI, like from a simple machine learning model all the way to kind of the most frontier model, if you're using any kind of use of AI in a high risk area, like education, law enforcement, employment, then you need to obtain a pre-deployment certification from an independent auditing body. And it's very, very kind of strict like that. And I think it's been quite interesting, and they have other technology legislations like the GDPR for data protection that are similar, kind of a blanket regulation where you're going to have to comply as a company. The US was never going to do something like that. But there's been a lot of debates in terms of how it should approach it. So there's kind of different verticals. There's the sectoral area. So you see more efforts even at the federal level towards child protection. For example, there's the whole issue of the deep fake. And then we're also going to see areas like the financial sector and the healthcare sector that are generally more regulated that also have to incorporate, AI regulation. Same thing also for transportation. You don't want self-driving cars to start crashing into people too much. So that is an area that would be more regulated in and of itself. And then because the federal government is not going to have an umbrella legislation, some of the states are trying to do that themselves. And so the Colorado AI Act did something a bit similar, I think, to the EU AI Act in that it identified high-risk systems, and it wants companies to disclose the different tools that they're using in these domains, and then to show their due diligence. So at the moment, some states will do this and some states won't necessarily do this. And what we also saw with the Colorado AI Act is that it was actually delayed. So it's not going to be effective in February. I think it's going to be effective in June 2026 as of yesterday. And that's because they're also facing a huge technology lobby because of this innovation question. So we can actually go into that more if you want, this kind of tension and question between regulation and innovation. And the EU is criticized for that, but you also have to make these tools safe. So how do you balance that?
It's really interesting because every time you mention something like that, I always keep thinking to myself, it's this idea of building because we can versus building because we should. And so there's that fine line of like innovation versus regulation. Does one supersede the other? Does one come in and undercut the other? Where do you see that fine line between innovation and regulation?
Yeah, I think it's complex. You know, one of the perspectives that you can have is to take AI like the pharmaceutical industry, in the sense that pharmaceuticals, and it's an analogy that I've used a lot in the past, which is that pharmaceuticals are incredibly powerful. In order to be able to deploy that are going to be life saving, you have to make sure that they're safe, and so you need to do your due diligence, because otherwise, if people are making drugs, you know, in their bathtubs and stuff, and people start dying, you can't actually sell them, right? And people would not be able to access drugs. And so there's definitely a stream of thought in AI that says the same. You know, it's very, very powerful. We should be able to use it, but we can't use it if it's not safe. Then there's a kind of other perspective that's saying the way in which the regulations are structured are actually stifling innovation. And by that, it often means stifling small businesses and startups to deploy things. So, you know, you've been in the tech field for a while, and there's been a lot of kind of people just doing stuff and then kind of putting it out there and not a lot of oversight. And so there's definitely a culture. I mean, I worked as a data scientist in the times that I was the only data scientist in the office. It was kind of free, like I could do whatever I wanted to do, which is why I ended up going into governance, because I thought, you know, maybe we need to think about this a little more carefully. It's a lot of responsibility too. But so one of the challenges to these kind of blanket umbrella legislations is this idea that a small business or a startup would never be able to meet those reporting requirements. Maybe just like a small pharmaceutical company can't really like put out these new crazy things. It's actually quite complicated. So I think that's one of the pushbacks. But you know, we have this requirement by people. People want to be able to trust the tools, and they want to know that there's some kind of due diligence that's been done and that it's safe. And if we keep just addressing every issue from a sectoral perspective, it becomes very confusing, and that can also stifle innovation. So I don't know, you know, the exact answer to this, but I definitely think that we need to continue working and having these conversations and thinking about the right way to regulate this domain.
Do you? That actually brings up a really good kind of segue into something else I was going to talk about. So I know we're seeing a lot of growth in kind of I don't know researchers, but like new jobs pop up. You know, AI strategy, AI governance. It seems to be something that's more of a title these days. Where when I first met you, kind of the title was like, wow, this is a really interesting title. I knew conceptually what it was, but I think my first conversation with you was like, okay, what exactly do you do? And I was like, wow, we need more of this. Mm-hmm. Do you think that companies are actually looking for this? Do you think that this is something that is front and center now along like, okay, we need to be implementing some type of governance along AI within our organization?
Yeah. So I agree with you. These kinds of roles are popping up more and more. And there's a lot of people in my field that have done either public sector or more academic work that are going into companies now to lead this kind of work. And you have roles that are AI governance and roles that are AI strategy. It's kind of two sides of the same coin. So I think when companies want AI strategy, they're thinking more about, you know, harnessing the benefits of AI. So, you know, incorporating some innovative ideas and making sure that, you know, AI tools are either in the incorporated internal processes or added to the product and so on. And then the AI governance component often is thought of as a little bit more of a risk management function. Sometimes companies put it in a compliance sector, so they hire a lawyer to interpret the different legislations and inform the company. From my perspective, it's actually good to have a holistic view on things. I actually think that, you know, you want to use AI generally if it's useful, but it has to be safe. And so I wouldn't split those two functions. I would incorporate it into the same office and have it talk to the risk function and talk to the innovation and development function, but be a little bit standalone, because there's so many different things to think about right now in AI. You need to have a holistic perspective. Otherwise, you end up doing things that are a bit narrow. You know, we've seen companies recently, for example, say, oh my God, we're going to use AI to cut costs and we're going to fire a whole bunch of people. And that's somebody who was only thinking, who's not thinking about governance, the reputational risk was immense. The actual impact on the product was immense. People the clients didn't want to use the product anymore because they felt like this was not done ethically. Different repercussions that you would need to have looked at this from a bigger perspective than just, okay, we're going to replace some staff. It's just a numbers thing, and it's going to be very smooth,
Yes, it's interesting because I know that, well, I mean, on the other side, anyway, so there's a different argument I've had with people along the lines of like, we've thought about it for years, like we're going to bring in some type of SaaS, that's just going to fix things magically for us.
Yeah.
And now we have AI and it's like, great, it's just going to fix things magically for us. And a lot of times what I've seen, especially out there, is they went kind of what you said is that people first route, not operations first route. And that's a different conversation for a different time because there's a lot of costs that are associated from an operations standpoint that obviously AI can clean up for us, but shouldn't be. I think we jumped ahead a little bit as far as replacing people, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But again, that's the industry that I'm in. Do you know, like, what are early warning signs that a company needs or should be paying attention to if they know they need governance, but they haven't realized it yet? Like, what are some warning signs that people should be looking out for?
I think that every company that's starting to adopt AI in a way that is changing its processes or systems, especially if it's kind of medium-sized or larger, they need to think about this intersection between strategy and governance. So, I mean, first of all, there's so many different kinds of AI, obviously, and a ton of companies already use AI, but often I think we're talking more about like generative AI tools and really kind of adopting these emerging AI tools. And if they're doing it in a way that's going to change their internal processes or change the way in which they deliver their product in a significant way, I would start thinking about this role. The other one is this idea of high-risk uses of AI. So I think it applies for companies too. If you're in a domain where your AI tools are going to be interfacing with people, either you're going to have a chat and people are going to be interacting with that directly, or you're in healthcare or you're in education. Now we're going to be bringing more AI into schools, it looks like. So that's going to be an area where a lot of companies are going to be expanding. So all of these high risk areas, I think you definitely need somebody to think about it very. When we talked about the Colorado AI Act, there was this idea of responsible care, and like the idea that you're going to be just very careful and really think about the right way to implement these tools, especially because of the reputational risk and the potential harm to clients that could happen.
So risks. That's the amount of risks, right? Because I think of everybody I've talked to has got they think we all know what the risks are. Some of us want to talk about them. Some of us will take them on head, and some of us are like, no, everything's gonna be fine. Like, just don't, sooner or later, like the closet door is gonna come popping open and all the stuff's gonna land on us. What are the real risks we're facing with AI in today's landscape?
I mean, it totally depends what use case you have. I think you have a bunch of risks that are kind of from the technology perspective, errors. A lot of the conversation over the last few years has been around bias. So bias is basically that the output of your tool would be different depending on the group of the population. And so that's definitely, if you're producing content and you have either stereotypical or discriminatory content, that's a risk. If you're using AI to make decisions, that's where bias can come into. So for example, AI to allocate the amount of loan that you're approved for. And that's a use case that came up a lot. So it like kind of evaluates the profile in the background and then it gives a loan. And you saw that groups of the population that were more historically marginalized, they received less money. And so that's a huge risk for our society because the amount of capital that you have access to has like a massive impact on your life, right? And so those are some of the risks that you need to think about. Then you have risks related that it's not so much the AI, but it's just a massive digitization. So all of the privacy, the cybersecurity risks, those kinds of things just become augmented, when we're converting so many processes and platforms to AI. It's not necessarily related to the fact that it's AI, but it's just to really be able to think about it. Although, as we see, there are additional privacy concerns with generative AI tools. So just making sure that they're locked down, making sure that, intellectual property is not leaked, those kinds of things. And we're seeing all kinds of different risks pop up too. Like some researchers are looking at the environmental considerations of using large language models for an individual company that might be a high electricity bill. For example, if you keep just running these energy consuming models all the time. And so there has to be a kind of cost benefit analysis for individual companies. And then at a broader level, we're doing more of a societal cost benefit analysis as well, and that's more for governments and for international organizations.
Yeah. And I know it doesn't have to do with strategy or governance, but it is a really interesting thing. And I think we're starting to see the come to light on energy consumption, water consumption,
yeah,
natural use of data centers, how utilities organizations are going to be overrun.
Yeah.
I was told by a very close contact of mine who sits on the board of utilities companies that to look forward to a 25 to 35% increase in your electric bill this year. And I'm not happy. She was correct.
Anyone is thrilled about that.
Yeah, that was pretty brutal, and I wasn't even here for like 2 weeks. So, risk management. Do you see AI strategy as closer to risk management, or is it really about growth and competitive edge?
So I continue to think that it has to have both. I actually think that each element is a bit limited. You can't really use the benefit of AI if you're only thinking about the risks, and vice versa. And I think that if you have these functions in separate areas of your company, there could be, it could be adversarial a little bit. Like, so the risk person just in charge of blocking everything, and then the innovation person pushing everything. And I think it would be better to have a more holistic perspective and say strategically what would be, the best use of AI for our company, and we're going to do an impact assessment and do it properly. And that's what you would do for any new innovation anyways. Like in technology, you are always careful. You're not going to just say, okay, we're going to launch all these new databases and not do your cybersecurity due diligence. So I think that's how I see it. I see it that way. And again, I see it as kind of its own office that has an internal thought leadership and kind of an external thought leadership potentially as well. So depending on the size of the company, your chief AI officer or your chief AI governance officer could also start having these conversations with other similar companies and with governments to think through what would be the best way to manage AI. And I would add that even though we talked about the regulation element and that it's very confusing and kind of patchwork, there's something that's relatively consistent, I think, in the US is the NIST AI risk management framework. So this is like a standard basically that is published and kind of endorsed even at the national level, and it's a voluntary standard on what to do. It looks at what are high risk uses of AI, how would you address this as a company? So even if it's not mandated by law, it would be really interesting to look at that and to integrate those elements into internal policies when you deploy new AI tools.
I think it's interesting you mentioned a lot of things in there, because I think there's a lot of people that get very excited and it's the ready, fire, aim approach.
Yeah.
And then by that time you're like, oh boy. And, we didn't do due diligence because everybody's trying to get, the first horse out of the gates.
Yeah.
And it's that idea of like, well, as long as I'm winning the horse race, I'm going to be in pretty good shape, we think. So, and it's interesting because especially over the last month, we've seen these, the battles, if you will, over talent, over tools, over who's going to launch what first, there's a lot of people very grumpy about about ChatGPT 5.
Yeah.
And there's some people who are like, I didn't even notice it. So it's always going to be again, we're still in the kind of infancy stages of some of this, which is nuts. But I agree that it needs to be policed a little bit.
Yeah. I would say too that, I think some companies, not every company, but some companies are kind of taking their customers a little bit for granted in this domain, in thinking, you know, it's fine, like they'll accept our innovation and everything like that. And I feel like the ones that are the most successful are the ones that are taking a professional approach to this, you know, and saying like we want people to be able to trust our products. We want to build them properly, you know, and we want a partnership with our customer base where they feel that they're well taken care of. Every single time that you see a company that seems to have failed, I think they took their customers for granted, and they kind of took this philosophy of like, people don't know what they want, and if we throw new innovations at them, like they'll pick it up. And I think it's not necessarily the case now, especially because people are more empowered when it comes to AI now. So they have like a better grasp of the tools, but they also, like, this question of the bias is like, you don't have to have studied, you don't need a PhD, or you don't have to have studied in AI governance to know about AI biases. So it's part of the general conversation, and people are starting to have expectations in terms of how they're going to be treated by the companies that they give money to.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that's a whole different conversation as far as, you know, from an investment protocol standpoint, you know, who's giving money where to what,
yeah,
you know, versus who's building agents that are all just LLMs tied together to each other, and until there's a pricing increase on one of the middle agents, that all of a sudden it goes from $10 a month to $300 a month, and everyone's stuck. And now what do we do?
yeah.
But going back to the governance thing, as far as if there are people out there that are seeing this and they want to get into this, if they want to break into the strategy and the governance side of the business, what skill set, what skills should they develop? Like, what do they really need to know about? Like, what should they have on their tool belt?
Yeah, it makes me think of this when we, you know, like 10, 12 years ago, we were talking about the data scientist toolkit. I kind of think it's like this, like it's a variety of different skills in AI governance, the toolkit. And I was thinking about this a little bit, and I do think that it is pretty strong in the soft skill domain. So I would say, you know, like 60 to 70% soft skills. And then you need some hard skills. And by the hard skills, I mean, it's important to be able to master, to at least understand on a kind of deep level. Ideally, you've coded and you've experienced the technology stack yourself. But the other side is to understand, you know, the company, what are the different stakeholders? How are you going to kind of convene them? How are you going to speak to them? How to stay calm and balanced when everybody's just shouting about AI all the time, and you just have to kind of be like level-headed. I think that these kinds of roles are really about convening. So every vertical in a company will have somebody who you want to come to discuss with, and to maybe have workshops with, and to kind of think through different issues. So I don't think that people should think about the AI governance officer as kind of like the only person responsible and almost like the scapegoat if something goes wrong. I think it's more somebody who's there and who needs to be able to understand the bigger picture of the company and of the stakeholders, who needs to be able to collect information and then provide like appropriate guidance to inside the company. So you put up a website, you put up the policies and so on. So I would work on that kind of balance between the hard and the soft skills, and think through. I think each person comes in with a variety of different skills. And so I think those are the ones that you can kind of start highlighting when you're applying for these jobs. And my experience is that the public speaking and the communication becomes really strong. And that can be kind of hard for people that have a technical background, because you don't necessarily, I think we talked about before, you're not necessarily this massive extrovert if you're just coding all day. You know, I mean, some people are, but a lot of people are not. And if that's you, then it's worth, you know, getting some kind of training, because these kinds of functions are going to be a lot of talking to senior management, sitting on panels and discussing the future of AI and like which direction the world is going. It's a topic that people really, really want to talk about all the time. And I would say for me, at least, the public speaking thing has been something that I really leaned into, compared to when I was just working as a data scientist and I could spend like a week coding, you know, and like not talk to anyone. So it's that this is not the case anymore for AI governance.
Yes, let's put it this way, because as long as I've been doing, I mean, I've been in technology staffing and recruiting for 30 years, and there are some people who are very extroverted and there are some people who are not.
Yeah.
But that ability to explain, like you just said, is kind of really the word's articulation.
Articulation. Yeah.
What the possibilities are, so someone else can understand it, and then they can go, "Wow, okay, like thanks for letting us know about if we do this, these are consequences that we may be looking into." So,
yeah.
Is there a company that you'd point to that's from the is there a company that you'd point to that's modeling this correctly, that's getting it right now, getting it right so far?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know everything that's going on inside every company. What I can point to maybe is companies that I think they've started opening up these positions or hiring people with a lot of expertise in these posts and then giving them resources and visibility and kind of trusting them with these roles. So not every company is doing that. I think in the financial sector, you've seen a lot with JP Morgan Chase, for example. They're opening a lot in AI governance. Citibank too. Um, MasterCard. MasterCard is opening a lot of these roles and being very present in the space. And they're like, okay, so AI for financial services, and we're really, really going into it and discussing it and talking to international organizations and being really leaning in. In consulting, I think what's interesting is you see a lot of, I mean, they always do thought leadership, but like EY, for example, you have some experts that are on every single kind of standards committee internationally. You'll have experts from EY, from Deloitte that are there and that are kind of bringing that information back to the consulting services so that their consulting team is kind of aware of the bigger conversations and then they can advise companies. And I started seeing some other kinds of companies, like in manufacturing. General Motors just hired somebody, so that's super interesting to think through. What are the risk elements of incorporating AI into their manufacturing processes, and how they're going to be part of the conversation. And probably they're going to, they're thinking about self-driving cars or like other kind of uses of AI really in their products. So I think, which they already have, but I think that's really interesting. So those are some of the companies that I've seen these roles really taking prominence, as opposed to companies that are still thinking a little bit smaller, like a little bit like, we're going to have AI incorporated in compliance, or we're going to have, somebody at a more junior level doing strategy. And it's good, but it's helpful. I think there is some really interesting expertise in the field. So I think it's helpful to get people that are going to, have a little bit more of a thought leadership function.
I think that's also a lot to unpack in there, because it's again, we're learning about it every day.
Yeah.
Right? So what it can do, what it can't do, what we want it to do, what it really doesn't do, and the misconception of automation versus actual, artificial intelligence versus, Gen AI. So, how do you personally keep up? Like, what do you go to read? What are your go-tos to keep up with what's going on out there?
Well, actually, I was thinking about this a little bit. I keep up a lot on LinkedIn, I have to say. I mean, people write, I think we all do. So I'm probably not the only one. But I think people are just talking about AI nonstop. Actually, I need to turn off my LinkedIn sometimes because I need a break. I need to like go play music or go read a novel because it's a lot. But I think there's a lot of people that I'm following in my networks that are, making sure that the information, at least the governance and the policy information, are out there. I had a couple of recommendations. We mentioned this whole AI and energy area. There's actually a researcher that I really like that works in Hugging Face called Sasha Lucioni. And she was one of the top 100 in AI last year, I think, when it came out. And so she puts out not just thought pieces, like she actually does research on energy consumption. And I find it's always really interesting to check it and to see like what the latest data is on carbon footprint of AI models. From the UN or like international organization, there's a researcher now who works for the UN Secretariat called Lucia Velasco. And she focuses on AI governance, but also on the impact of AI on the economy, on labor. And I think that's a topic that people really want to understand, as you do.
Yeah.
But I think I think that the AI and labor and the economy is probably the biggest issue right now, that people really want to understand what's going to happen. Like, are they going to be able to pay their mortgage payments? And like, are they going to keep their jobs? And, you're seeing more and more these articles about how people shouldn't even go to university anymore, and like medical school is useless and law school is useless, and there's so much conversation about that. So people want to know, how do I position myself just on a personal level to be able to provide for my family and like live my life, And so those are conversations are super important. So those are the kinds of areas that I like to follow. I would also say that a lot of the US think tanks on a variety, on like different political spectrum, they comment on the legislations. And I've seen some publications that are super interesting where they bring in, because it's a kind of intra topic, like there's a lot of different dimensions of the AI space. They'll bring maybe 9 researchers to do the analysis of the an upcoming legislation, and then each researcher will comment on that. And I've seen that with a couple of think tanks, and I thought that was really interesting because you can kind of get a bigger perspective on what researchers think is going on.
Yeah, I think that's great because you definitely want different perspectives.
Yeah.
I mean, so for what I do literally for on a day-to-day basis is connect with mostly VPs of engineering, director, a lot of CTOs, and I'm not getting the same news from everybody anymore.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting thing because I've always been, almost 30 years of what I do. It's never been simple, but you can see trends, you can see common denominators, you can see like, if I'm hearing the same thing going on, you're like, okay, I kind of see what pattern is where this is going from a business perspective. And I'm not getting that right now. And it's a really interesting space. And obviously, a lot of the fact, and not to go on a tangent with the labor market, but I found it to be really interesting through talking to people. And it's this idea of, you've got two sides of the business. You can add zeros, subtract zeros.
Yeah.
And everyone's trying to make the balance sheet look good. And make the balance sheet look good, we've been subtracting zeros and trying to figure out a way to keep the same revenue line with less people. My argument is like, well, why aren't we trying to take that revenue line and go 10x?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we should be generating sales, empowering our people with this stuff, not cutting.
Yeah.
We should be adding to the staff or minimally taking the staff we currently have and then getting them the training they need, getting the know-how they need so we can generate more sales with this stuff. Because with all this also then comes back to we're able to theoretically do more with less, right? Do more with less things.
Yeah.
So we're saving time, but what are we doing? How are we reinvesting that time saved? And I think that's, again, it's a different conversation that I have on with different people. Almost like, are we utilizing these tools to go generate more sales and add zeros to the bottom line, build new products, get new things out there? Or are we trying to figure out how to take an apartment from, 10 to 6, but keep the same status quo? And the problem was, like, and everybody knows, if you keep the bottom line the same, but as inflation increases and your costs go up, sooner or later, there's a weird chasm that has to happen, and I'm not going to get into all that right now. But I will leave with this. So as when you explain to someone who's not in tech, I would say this, if you were to explain to my parents what AI governance does, how do you explain it? How do you make it land?
I mean, I think I mentioned it before, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but it's really, AI governance is just about making sure that we can all harness the benefits of AI and have it work for us, as opposed to the other way around, And like some of the things that you were just talking about is exactly that. And that's what the UN has been trying to do. And these global governance conversations is saying, either way, the UN had like all these goals, right? Improve the quality of life of people, help developing countries, reduce poverty, reduce natural disasters, those kinds of things. So the objective would be, can AI be used in order to support those objectives, and not do the other side, which is, put human rights at risk, increase the conflict, increase polarization of our society. So AI governance is really about that, and that's the governance, like the government side is using it for good and for social good. But I think for a company, it can be the same idea. How is it going to, what area could it be most impactful to make our company a better place, to have our product more relevant and more innovative and more interesting, and just avoid the many pitfalls that AI brings as well. So that's how I would basically explain it.
The nice thing is, so thank you for. So you did say it once, but it's always a good thing to hear it again. So thank you. So on that note, we're going to wrap up our series here. I think this has been awesome. It's so great to hear perspectives for somebody who's in the trenches of not from a securitization standpoint, not as like a CISO level, but more of a strategy. And again, like, are we doing the right thing, with this, making society better? And I'm one of those people, is like, if it can make society better and it increases our human connection, and increases our input together as humans, this is awesome. But if it starts stealing critical thinking and your inability to just solve problems because now you're leaning on something, I think that's something a little bit different. But again, you and I have had that conversation before, and it's I like deep thought. I happen to like math problems. I know I have a calculator that sits in front of me and I've got all the tools around her, but I'm like, I really enjoy thinking about the dynamic on how things really work, because then I understand it. If I understand the way it's put together, I understand the way it works. If I understand to break it down, knowledge is power. So
yeah, I definitely agree. And I'll kind of close on this, is that this idea that we could, that thinking is going to be useless, or that going to university is going to be useless, that always strikes me as so opposite to what we want in our human experience. There's a lot of things that I don't want to be doing. Like, I don't want to do my laundry. I'm like pretty bad with cleaning and stuff. There's a lot of things in life, but thinking is really fun, and it's what gives us meaning as human beings. So even this question about university, like, university is not about maximizing your profit or so on. It's really about giving yourself the opportunity to kind of explore what human beings have come up with, and the history of our society and so on, and think and develop your analytical skills and so on. So I really think that this idea that Gen AI is going to replace human thinking is a huge problem. And I don't think it's going to go there. I think a lot of people, they really value creativity, and they value innovation, and they value deep thought, and they need to continue having a space to do that.
I couldn't agree with you more. I really hope that everyone out there is hearing that, is nodding their head and saying thank you. So on that note, so for Techclusive, thank you, Eleonore, so much for being here. So obviously this is, just connecting with someone like Eleonore, that's one of the benefits that you're going to have access to by joining the Techclusive network. Again, it's a privatized community for the elite level in technology. It is an invite referral base. If you're interested, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can send me an email. It's thetechclusive.com, and you'll read more about it out there. But thank everyone for coming in today. I really appreciate your time. Eleonore, thank you very much. It's been awesome.
Thank you. It was really fun. My pleasure. Bye, everyone.
We'll see everyone soon. Take care.